Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to watch the two Test matches yesterday because they were on Amazon Prime, and yeah, I refused to pay for that. They weren't on free-to-air TV. Amazon have got 17 of the 20 autumn internationals this autumn in the Rugby Union, but they haven't got any of the women's, which is good. So the England New Zealand Test match kicks off at 2 o'clock. I am looking forward to watching England's women play the All Black women. Um, that's going to be a very fun Test match to watch because both teams are very evenly matched. So there you go. So there is a bonus out of all this. I mean, a lot of people criticise women's sport. You have to see it as it is. You have to accept that it's not the same technique and skill level, and stop trying to compare it to the men's. But I'm actually quite looking forward. Plus, the two FA Cup women's semi-finals are taking place today as well. So I've got a choice of things to watch, but I'm going to choose the rugby. Um, in the cricket, yes, in the cricket, there's been a lot of discussion with cricket in the last month or so since New Zealand and England withdrew from their tours of Pakistan. Um, the social media abuse that some Indian players and their families are facing following that historic defeat to Pakistan the other day as well. So again, sports stars, social media, and the toxic den of humanity that social media is. Obviously, the ongoing Black Hawks abuse scandal is still having effects. The only person involved in that meeting 11 years ago that still has a job at the moment is Kevin Cheveldayoff, the Jets general manager. The Jets are having a press conference tomorrow. I think it's pre-game, so it'll be a bit around lunchtime Canadian time tomorrow, so evening our time. Yeah, football. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens with the women's FA Cup games and the women's rugby this afternoon. I'm debating which to watch. I think I'm going to go with the rugby, to be honest, because I know it's going to be more of an even contest with the world in England and New Zealand going head to head, and that's a good marker for when the world comes around for the women's game. Be a very good marker. But yes, the social media side of things is definitely something that yeah. There's what did I do with my beard? I just turned it into the 1970s Dutch the 1970s footballer, soccer player look. I was going for a Neeskins or a Georgie Best. I just decided to change it up. I do it every so often. I shave like 4 or 5 times a year, where I'm either clean shaven or partially shaven. So I thought, you know what, it's been a while since I've had a trim. I think it's been like 3 months since all this was off. Maybe 4 months. I think I was still with my ex partner. So it's about 4 months since I had all this off. Second best rugby union team. Are we talking the men's game or the women's game? Yeah, I think Australia, not quite yet. I think yes, they've been able to play more games than the Springboks because of COVID, and I think that's had a bearing on team chemistry and player development because the South African domestic and international has been so interrupted in the last 2 years or so since the World Cup. Um, but I wouldn't say Australia are necessarily the second best team right now. I think their form is good, but there's still, I think, when it comes down to it, I'm not necessarily sure that over a 4 year cycle that they are consistent enough to be the second best team. Well, there's a reason why they've only been to one World Cup final since 2003, for example. The South Africans, the All Blacks, are more consistent over longer spells. And that has a bearing. Plus, the South Africans have players based both in South Africa and across Europe, so they play different styles of rugby. You could argue the Springboks' style right now is kick and physicality, which is not necessarily the most entertaining style to watch. But I will say that it's effective. If you use the rules effectively, you deserve to win, regardless of the aesthetics. And this is, I think, where rugby union has a problem: is that the rules it can lead to what we call kick tennis, which you don't see as much in the women's game, by the way. You don't see much kicking from hand in the women's game. The women's game is more running, running with the ball and passing the ball out of trouble. The men's game, unfortunately, the tier one nations, there's a lot of kicking involved. Some rely on kicking more than others. It can become very one-dimensional. I think that's a flaw with England. They kick too much aimless kicking. Um, we've seen the Italians in recent Six Nations campaigns, and they haven't been very successful in that period, but they have tried to think outside the box with trying to exploit rules. They've had to make rule changes because of the Italian tactical thinking against England, because England kicked up a fuss. Ireland, again, I think the Sexton axis, again, too much kicking there, a bit too one-dimensional. There's also the concern of what they call project players, where you get players on residency to apply for, citizenship. The same with France. So many overseas-born players that have only applied or got registered for the international side because of residency. That's a rule that is regularly exploited by rugby union and to a certain extent rugby league. But yeah, I was very disappointed to find out that Amazon have the majority of the autumn tests. Really disappointed with that. Club rugby, club football, I couldn't give a toss. International, I think that should be on free to wear, or at least parallels with, if you want to choose for subscription or choose to watch free to wear, you should have that choice. I'm not overly keen on Amazon money coming into sport, especially with some of their tax affairs. And the only reason why Amazon have been given some of these TV deals is because they suddenly declared a profit. Yeah. I wasn't, and the football they've got is the crap games that no one really wants to watch anyway over Christmas, because everyone's generally too pissed to care. The Man United win, it's been a very interesting period last 2 weeks for Man United, and it's the inconsistency, and Tottenham are just a disaster themselves. Beating Tottenham is nothing to shout about, because Tottenham are a shambles, and I think are always going to be a shambles with that ownership and that dressing room and the culture within that club. Man United, look, I feel sorry for Solskjaer. He receives a hell of a lot of abuse. Not all the players that are in the squad were his signings. You could argue Mourinho and Van Gaal were the architects of what is generally that squad. He's made a couple of signings. Absolutely, every manager does. You have to question their transfer policy. How much say does the manager have? Even Alex Ferguson, I don't think, had the final say on a lot of transfers. It shows how good Ferguson was. Same with Arsenal with Wenger. Be careful what you wish for, especially with the Wenger out campaign that Arsenal fans had over the last years he was there. He still won them FA Cups. He still brought silverware to that club. They were less competitive in the league, but he still made them qualify for Europe every season, and he still brought silverware to that club. So you've got to be careful what you ask for. It's very hard to replace such a dominant figure when you have a dominant manager who's there for a very long period of time. The problem is you don't really get in a promotion relegation system. You don't get that chance to rebuild, really, because the financial impacts of dropping down a league or two are felt, and it's harder to do a rebuild in a promotion relegation system. This is what Barcelona are going to find. The Barcelona situation, I think, is hilarious how they got in this state. Koeman was just thrown under the bus, in my opinion. It doesn't matter who had the job, Koeman or someone else, they were going to get thrown under the bus. The situation there is if that's any other club, right, on the playing side of things, just having a down season, they probably stick with the manager for another till the end of the season, because it's Barcelona and they demand success every season, because failure is not an option, because it's always that win now mentality which is killing them. The win now mentality in sport is what kills sport. And who would want to actually? They wonder why so many players don't go into management or coaching. This is the reason: job security isn't there. Job security isn't there. You know, and great players, as I say, don't necessarily make great managers. Who is the second best rugby union team behind the All Blacks? Well, the All Blacks choked it in the World Cup, so we could be, and the All Blacks haven't necessarily had it easy the last 3 years. They haven't won every game. They haven't been as dominant. They have shown weaknesses, but the whole Super Rugby format is in crisis. COVID exposed a lot of the problems that were already there. At the moment, I think the All Blacks are the team to beat. Australia have been on some good form lately, but they need to be consistent for the rest of the World Cup cycle going into the World Cup, and they need to come out of the other side of that I think the goal for the Australians is to make the final again, and try and win. Uh, the problem is in the old Super Rugby format. Look how many Australian sides actually won the Super Rugby title at the end of things, and it was dominated by the All Blacks and the Springbok sides. So there is that. But no, yeah, the Man United win. I think there are a lot of issues there. Are they all Solskjaer's fault? Well, the players stopped playing for Mourinho. They stopped playing for Van Gaal. Um, it looks like some players have stopped playing for him. Um, he gets a lot of abuse on social media, but it's the same as Steve Bruce at Newcastle. Like, he faced the same challenges as Rafa Benitez. Uncertainty over the ownership, lack of investment in the infrastructure of the team and the training ground and behind them. And ex-managers and players have said it was chaotic there. It doesn't matter who's the manager of Newcastle. Um, and yeah, it's one of them. Um, it We'll see if Man United can become consistent. Where they're losing games, they need to get a draw. Where they're drawing games, they need to turn those draws into wins. Um, they, I think Man City as well. They're starting to show cracks, and it's the Guardiola let's get mercenary players in system. Some of their signings haven't really worked out at this point. I think Grealish should have stayed at Villa. I think same with Drinkwater going to Chelsea from Leicester. You go from a positive culture where it's a team dynamic to a team full of individuals. Uh, and there's a lot of issues with Man City off the field with players having lots of legal problems and off-field antics that bring the game into disrepute. There is a culture issue at Man City. Of that, there is no doubt. Um, you know, you just look at the last 2 years and you look at some of the players who've misbehaved off the field, and then you look at the Mendy situation. There's a culture issue there. There's a sense of entitlement, and there's clearly a very toxic culture within that dressing room, within that club, because clearly that behaviour is tolerated or allowed to be got away with until they get caught by the authorities, or when they're stupid enough to put it on social media, such as Carl Walker's case during the first couple of lockdowns. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. Um, you know, and I think that toxic culture at Man City is starting to have an impact on that team. The win at all costs, the win now mentality is self-destructive in the end, because it's not sustainable. There's only so long you can keep going. We've got to win every season. We can't have a down season. We've got to win every season. Because from my viewpoint, I don't expect my team. I'm a Blackburn fan. I don't expect to win every game. I expect there to be defeats along the way. I expect there to be some hurdles that you will overcome. You can learn more from defeat than victory. Um, you've got to learn how to lose before you can learn how to win. You can't just and this is where like some of these teams have these culture shocks when they have a little bad run like this. They're not used to it. They don't know how to cope because they haven't learned that losing is part of the process to become successful. You learn more from a defeat than a victory. And I think last season, with the disruption with COVID and all that, Man City was scraping through the Christmas period. That's the reason why they won the league. It was other teams just couldn't cope with the festive period, the amount of players who were in COVID protocols who couldn't train or play or in isolation, coaches getting ill, the lack of fans at stadiums. Man City got through that period, partly because they're used to playing in front of half an empty stadium at the Etihad anyway. And that's not a joke. They have to pump fake crowd noise in to make it seem like it's a capacity stadium because they never sell out. I wonder why that is. And yeah, such a plastic club. I miss the old main road. I've got friends who are fans of Man City who are still wearing the old Thomas Cook, jerseys with the old logo and the kit pack stand used to be packed out every weekend. And this is when they're in the old Division Three and facing down, further down the league pyramid. Sean Goater saving the day. Yes, I've got friends who go that far back. A lot of the fans now are what you call plastics, the glory hunters, which is basically a term for Man United fans as well, really, Liverpool fans from the 80s and 90s. You look at around the southeast and how many fans of Man United, Liverpool, and Man City there are who've never been to Manchester or Liverpool in their lives, never been to a game in their lives. What? And I've been to a fair few Blackburn games. I know I don't live in the northwest, but at least I made the effort to go see my team play. Some of you, they're glory hunting fans. They're plastics. But yeah, that's just the global side of the game now, isn't it? 90% of Man United fans don't live in the UK. Out of the Greater Manchester area, they're the least supported team in Greater Manchester. Ironically, before Bury went out of business, there were more Bury season ticket holders who lived in Greater Manchester than Manchester United. It's ridiculous. You couldn't make this up. You really couldn't. But yeah, I think Man City with losing in the League Cup, following that up with a defeat to Palace at home, which is always rub your hands with glee. And then Wilfried Zaha says, "Well, I'm receiving racist abuse online." You couldn't make this stuff up. Wilfried Zaha is a brilliant player. He's Palace's top goal scorer in the top flight all time in the Premier League era. Brilliant player. Didn't work out at Man United. He's more loved at Palace. He's more integral to Palace. And I think Patrick Vieira is doing a very good job, considering, he used to play for Man City. The irony of that. You couldn't make this up. I think that meant a lot to the era, getting his team to win that game. But the whole, talking about social media and abuse, football it's endemic. Women's sport, it's endemic. It's there's got to come a point where these athletes, these players of team sports, just delete your social media accounts, remove them, refuse to go on it. Problem is, this is the Instagram generation, this is the Snapchat generation. Pogba spends more time changing his haircut than actually playing football, it seems. And a lot of these young players are growing up in the social media generation. They know nothing before then. They don't. I remember when Facebook first and MySpace and Bebo and MSN Messenger first came along in the mid 2000s. I was a teenager then. A lot of these players were like 5, 6, 7 years old at the time. So they weren't on social media, but all they've learned from their early teenage years till now is social media. They don't know what it was like before mobile phones and games consoles really became super popular. And social interaction was you met face to face rather than just talking on Messenger. Weird that. And so they're used to this social media culture. And then you've got players and coaches and managers and officials getting pulled up on something that they said 10 years ago, 12 years ago, which was acceptable then that isn't acceptable now. And that's cancel culture, and that pisses me off as well. And I can have a discussion about cancel culture on the other channel. The other channel's live stream was a bit quiet last night. There was a few things to discuss, but I had issues with my internet, and it was a quiet stream. But the social media side of things, I have to admit, there's got to come a breaking point. I've had shitty comments on videos from a lot of Welsh Rugby Union fans. They got really vitriolic between 2018 and 2019. So I basically just said, well, I hope Wales lose every game. And they lost a record defeat almost yesterday. I think it was 60-something 14. Embarrassing defeat yesterday. And question marks over Wayne Pivac. And I question Wayne Pivac actually be the right guy. Yeah, they win the Six Nations. It disrupted Six Nations the other recently. Fair play. Cool. Fine. But his first 18 months in charge was shambolic. I'm not going to lie. The win percentage was just not good enough. Stats don't lie. I hate using stats as an example. They don't lie. And Welsh Rugby Union fans were like, "Oh, we hate your channel. You fucking biased. Oh, you got this racist Brexit." I hate. Why bring politics into it? Why? Because you got a chip on your shoulder? Because your fan base is a toxic pile of feces? The best way to describe Welsh Rugby Union fans? Because there's a reason why the Welsh game domestically is up shit's creek financially. They don't go and support it. There's a reason why the Welsh Union's financially busted, because it's been mismanaged, and that's before COVID. Players going into the last World Cup weren't sure if when they finished the World Cup they were going to have a team domestically to play for. That's not me criticising their style of play, which I don't like either, by the way. and the fact they have to have loads of overseas coaches to coach them because there's no decent Welsh coaches. Who knew? Who knew that the best coaches aren't Welsh for the Welsh national side? They've got these project players who really should be playing for Tonga or fucking Samoa or Fiji, but they're plastics. They're wax. South Africans seem to play for every nation, including South Africa. Apparently, the South Africans playing for almost every tier one, tier two, or tier three nation because of residency. It's ridiculous. They just produce so many players and they can't fit them in the Springbok side. Shows the depth that the South African rugby system has. That players can go, oh yeah, my mum or my dad or my granddad has a tenuous link, or I've lived here for 5 years. I'll just go play here. It just shows how much production that they have. There's been so these are, and then the selection policy, which I don't agree with, where you've got to play domestically, except after so many tests you can play overseas. You wouldn't get that in football. That wouldn't happen. Used to happen, doesn't happen now. What I call the protectionist, isolationist, backwards 1950s policy of you've got to be domestically based to represent the country. I think that's bull. I think if you want to create a global game, it's got to be free market. You've got to have the players playing in the best location possible for their development. Because if you're going to then prevent play, I mean, it's ridiculous. And with the money problems that the game in Europe is facing and in Southern Hemisphere, look at Major League Rugby. Players are starting to look over there. Young players and veteran players are going, I can get paid over there. The quality may not be as good, but it's a growing league. The standard's improving every year. I can get paid. Um, you know, I can grow the game. I'm going over there. There's a lot of young players from France, England, Ireland, South Africa, Australia. We're talking under the age of 23 are going, you know what, I'm willing to get a work visa for however long their visa lasts, go over there to Canada and the US, get a contract, play some rugby, um, like learn a different culture, you know, go under the radar so I can actually have like a quiet, non-playing life, personal life, which is what a lot of sportsmen crave is anonymity. Rugby's not massive in the US. It's growing, but they go over there. Danny Cipriani, for example, Johnny Wilkinson, some of these big names like Dan Carter, they can't go anywhere without being mobbed by fans going coming off Europe. Um, so when these players are looking at the US and Canada, going, I can play, earn good money, and be pretty much anonymous when I'm not playing in the off season or when there's not a match on or if I'm suspended or injured. Not a lot of people in the sports market I'm in the town or city or the state I'm living in would know who I am because they're either into American football, NBA basketball, the NHL, Major League Baseball, whatever it is. I can be an anonymous. I could just look like an overseas resident who works in like whatever industry. I can get away with being normal. It's a thing, um, and that's the thing I think. Yeah, with the social media side of things, like and the way the mainstream media works as well, with hounding some of these players when they make mistakes, when they have missteps in their personal life. I don't need to know about Wayne Rooney's marriage problems with Colleen, to be honest. I don't know why anyone would be interested in that. But apparently, that salacious crap, the magazines, the news, the tabloids, they're after it because they're public figures. I don't care. Does that affect his ability to coach his team? I think the ownership of Derby County affects his ability to coach that team because they're in administration. And I think he's done a fantastic job with the limited resources he has done. But yeah, a lot of players, especially when they go to non-traditional locations where sports are played. So the NHL is obviously trying to grow in these expansion locations like Vegas, which is apparently like a real fun place to play, and the local community's brought in. But like places like Arizona, places like Florida, players sign there as free agents because they know that it's not the biggest sport in that sports market, and they can just walk around casually. Back in the day, at least, social media now you can't get away with that. You can't do that because there'll be someone who knows. Oh, look who I found, X player, insert name here, and then it's on the pissing social medias. So I feel sorry for professional athletes, professional sports stars now. They have less privacy than they did 20 years ago. The crap they face on social media. We like Facebook's changed its parent company name to Meta because of all the negativity that's come out. in the last couple of years. A lot of scandal around Facebook. Google had some, there's been pushback from YouTubers like me saying, "Well, why have you taken away our ad revenue?" So they called their parent company Alphabet. Didn't catch on. Who knew? Google. Who knew? Um, so yes, the social media side of things, I find it interesting. I've criticised many players. Now, if you notice the history of the channel, I was more critical of players misbehaving 3, 4 years ago than I am now. I'm a bit more understanding that there are like extenuating circumstances, three strike policy, get help. I've gone through the whole process of addiction and mental health myself. But I will say this: if there seems to be a spate of players at a sports team, for example, having the same misbehaviour, then you have to look at the culture and go, right, they're in a culture where that's seen as acceptable. Whereas if we're doing that in normal day life, in our jobs, we're getting drugs tested, drinks tested, we're getting, fired on the spot for breach of contract, all sorts of things. And when you have a sport or a team within that league, for example, that seems to have a spate of drug problems, alcohol problems, misbehaviour off the field, negative headlines, then you start having to look at the culture of that dressing room, the culture of that club, the structures there, and going, well, this is not an isolated incident. This is not one player with an alcohol or drug problem. This is not one player who's got some mental health difficulties or some personal issues. This is a culture thing within that dressing room, which is toxic, which is negative, and clearly, yes, a lot of onus is on the player, especially if there's off-field antics that involve like assault, sexual assault, like Mendy, for example, criminality. That then, yeah, lies with the player. But if there's like an addiction problem or a struggle with mental health, then that lies on the team. That lies with the team. And and then this whole social media thing, you can't get away with misbehaviour anymore. Ben Stokes found that out with Alex Hales. Alex Hales, his career hasn't really, well, yeah, done much. There's drug use issues there. Uh, what did I make of the City loss? Rubbing my hands with glee because the win. As I was talking about negative culture within a dressing room, there's a lot of. If this was another sport, um, with some of the players who've had off-field antics, criminality, and other things, so Kyle Walker and Mendy, for example, we'll be talking a massive scandal. I don't like Man City. I don't like the culture of that team. Um, the fan bases. I had one fan on here going. I said, "Were you a fan before 2007, before the money, before the success?" He went, "No." And then I said, "You're not a true fan, and you haven't stuck with them through the dark times. Fuck off." And he was like, "Oh, why are you criticising my team for?" I was like, "You don't understand the history of that team, the struggles they went through, the lack of success since the 70s, the history of that team. You just think that team exists. I can't stand City. I can't stand their fan base, of the newer fans who just think the City was just formed in 2007. I've got friends who are City fans from the dark days when the team was in the lower divisions, where they tumbled through the divisions, where Sean Goater scored, I think it was against Macclesfield, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, to keep them basically from avoiding another relegation. They went through some tough times, and you know they're finally, yeah, okay, they've had this period of success, which has been bought with blood money, as I call it. Oh, the Bartomeu. I mean, look, the Barcelona situation, I just laugh at that because they, for many years, were trying to espouse the fact that they were a proud community club, that stood against hate, stood against division. We don't have sponsors on our jerseys. We're proud to be members. Members run the club. Blah 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 blah. And in the end, it was basically a nice PR front, but in reality, it was a toxic shithole that I have no sympathy for. And I wish them all the failure in the future because it couldn't have happened to a more toxic dump, that is Barcelona. The arrogance of that organisation, and it just shows again the win now mentality has destroyed that organisation from within. It's got a rotten core. It doesn't matter Laporta, Bartomeu, previous club presidents. The win now. Oh no! Oh! We finished third place this season. Sack the manager, but he's only been here 8 months. No, sack him. So Bobby Robson, Terry Venables. they had classed as unsuccessful spells when they still brought silverware to that club. Um, you know, I you're a City fan. You must know they pump fake crowd noise into the Etihad to make it seem like that has got a capacity stadium. It's called the empty Etihad by away fans around the country and the Champions League for a reason. Their Champions League attendances, again, COVID notwithstanding, or Europa League, because obviously there have been seasons where you played in the Europa League as well, are shockingly poor. Your FA Cup attendances are shit. I'm allowed to criticise because they try and hide the cameras in a certain way to hide the empty seats because they want to sell the global brand. You wouldn't have those empty seats at Main Road. I'm not going to lie, the old Kipax was an intimidating stand filled with vitriol and hatred. The Etihad now is just full of tourists. And you have to ask the question why you're not selling out games. If you're that successful, is it the price of tickets? Is it that there's a disconnect between the fans and the club? Do some of the fans who stuck with the club through the dark times feel sold out? What is the reason it's called the empty Etihad? We had the same thing at Blackburn for a while called Empty Ewood, but that was more in a protest at the owners, the Benkeys, mismanaging the team. And I haven't been to a Blackburn game since the Benkeys took over. I refuse to give them any of my money. I've not bought any merchandise. I've, you know, steered clear of my club in protest while they own it. I will return when they sell up. I will go to a Blackburn game when they're no longer in charge. When that is, I don't know. But I will return to watch my team play when the Benkeys are gone, not before. I think there are some Man City fans who don't feel comfortable with the Arab money. They don't feel comfortable where the money's coming from and who's paying for that team. Pep, however, look, I can criticise Pep because, well, yeah, not enough of the so-called famed Man City academy. How many of the academy players since the takeover have made it into that team, apart from Foden? And Micah Richards obviously was one of the early academy products that made it into that team. Where's the academy products making it into the team? Come on, I'm waiting. Oh, that's right. You signed mercenary overseas players. Oh yeah. So that again, and they and you and Man City and Chelsea have both been found guilty of abusing the youth policy systems, the youth systems. Um, Hence why Chelsea had that transfer embargo, which actually benefited Chelsea, ironically, down the line. With them, the only one of the 12 clubs that were in favour of the European Super League in profit. Loads of these young players have now got game time in the starting squad because they couldn't sign any players, and it's actually benefited Chelsea long term. Oh, here's the thing: invest in youth. It breeds longer term success when you build a good core. I can see this win now mentality with City. I think it's starting to run its course. So there you go. Where's this famed Man City academy that they're talking about? It's a tax write-off. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. It's a tax write-off. The land they bought was technically Commonwealth Games land anyway. That was brownfield site for the temporary structures. Nothing was happening there. It's a tax write-off, which is interesting because on the other channel, like yesterday, I was discussing the G20 tax agreement of 15% corporation tax. So it's harder to hide your money offshore with 130 nations signing up. Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, I just do live streams when I feel like it. It's a bit of a slow sports news day today. I think I'm gonna watch the women's rugby. I'm not gonna watch the women's FA Cup. Well, I love women's football. 2 games taking place. The women's rugby. I didn't go to watch any rugby yesterday because it was an Amazon Prime, and I'm not giving Jeff Bezos any of my fucking money directly. If I'm buying like books or clothing or anything like that, I always go through third party sellers. I never go direct through Amazon shop. I always go through private sellers so they make some money and Amazon doesn't make as much money off me. I always support the independents who use Amazon as a platform and eBay as a platform to sell their goods and wares rather than go direct. So Amazon make less money. That's a little tip there. And you can actually find things cheaper as well. Especially secondhand stuff. I never go direct to Amazon anymore. I always find I always find certain sellers, and I always go back to the same sellers for books. When I collect history books, mostly on. I'm a bit of a train spotter. I like steam trains. Okay, I'm 31. I like steam trains. There you go. Um, I always find about 5 or 6 sellers who sell a series of books that I'm collecting and never go direct through Amazon. So Amazon Prime, you're not getting any of my money. That's to do with a lot of things. I'm not, and the only reason they got the Premier League rights and now they've got some rugby rights and other sports rights is they declared a profit for the first time in their existence. They had to declare 1 year of tax profit. That's all. So they did some creative accounting to get, well, TV rights basically. That's it. Creative accounting. That's got to stop. Finding us a live stream. Yeah, well, again, I just felt like a live stream this morning. I did one yesterday as well, but you can always rewatch them. Some of my rants, especially about 2018, are legendary. I had some legendary rants on live stream. Some really funny ones. Um, really funny ones where I just blow up. I don't blow up as much now. I found that with my subscribers now, a lot of them are much better behaved. We've got moderators now, which I didn't have before, which helps massively. Uh, I didn't have moderators when I first started this because I thought I could cope with the chat. Turns out moderators are pretty handy, and I noticed the same names coming up. So when I noticed the same names coming up in live streams like regularly, if you've been in like more than 5 or 6 live streams and you regularly comment on channel videos, guess what? 2 of you just become moderators. What do I think of the Spurs defeat? Spurs, the summer sums up Spurs' problem. You've never, well, to be fair, I've been doing live streams since Easter 2018. And yeah, I mean, there was a period where I was doing live. I think one of my most popular live streams had about 150 people watching at one point. Not the case at the moment. The channel in the last, I'm going to say, year and a bit, I've sort of done less video content. I took the pandemic and work and some health issues meant I took some time off over the last 2, 3 years from 2018. Every summer I just I thought I need to de-stress. I need to, relax and yeah, it's cost me growth. But I do this as a hobby. This is not. I mean, if this was to make me money and someone was to go, do you want to have like do a podcast or something? Yeah, but it's not making me money. But yeah, I think of the Spurs defeat, the way they handled the managerial hunt in the summer, the way they handled Mourinho, the week of a cup final, when he was at that time the only manager to beat Pep in a cup final, was shocking. And then they tried to get Pochettino back, the guy they sacked in favour of Mourinho. You couldn't make this up. The Harry Kane situation where he just refused to report to training. All he had to do was like say, I'm fatigued, I need an extra week off, I want a bit of time with my family, COVID, whatever. And I'm sure the club and he's trying to force through a pissing transfer. And that shows there's issues with that club. I hope they don't win anything. That there are certain clubs I don't necessarily dislike the fans, but I dislike the culture of teams. And I go, that club is shit. I hate that particular culture. I I think the way the Newcastle fan base, and I love the Newcastle fans, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to throw a little bit of criticism at Newcastle fans for the way Steve Bruce was treated. He didn't treat Rafa like that, and he had the same problems. West Ham, I mean, David Moyes, if he'd never coached Man United, people would be saying get him in there. Man United is, again, a poison chalice, much like Tottenham, except Man United have actually managed to win trophies since Alex Ferguson retired. Tottenham have won nothing. But Man United is like a toxic chalice as well. I feel sorry for Solskjaer. I mean, Steve Bruce at Newcastle, that's a toxic job. There are certain clubs where it's just who wants to coach there. It doesn't matter if the club is successful or less successful. There are certain clubs right now where you have to ask yourself, do I really want? And this is why ex-players don't want to go into management. As I said earlier, the job security doesn't exist. And then the abuse. I mean, and we go back to the social media abuse. Steve Bruce's son, who is actually an ex-player, said it's taken a massive toll on my dad and my mum and my family. And Steve Bruce may never manage ever again. Now, you can say Steve Bruce is not the most successful manager. I mean, he had his chance with Hull to win that FA Cup. They were 2-0 up against Arsenal when they lost 3-2, and that was a brilliant game. I loved watching that game. I thought that was one of the best FA Cup finals I think I've ever seen. Imagine if Hull win that FA Cup, how different, the trajectory would be. I think, and some managers, it's just wrong club, wrong fit, doesn't work out. David Moyes, for example, at Man United, he obviously was under a lot of pressure there. He goes to Sunderland via Sociedad, doesn't work out in Spain. Sunderland, people go, oh, he's had it as a manager. Goes to West Ham, he's working wonders. He took a little bit of a break out of the game and goes to West Ham. He gets the play. He's got the support of the behind the scenes. He's refreshed himself a little bit. He's gone through Everton. He was a good manager, and at Preston as well. When Preston had no money, he did a very good job in making sure that they were a competitive old Division One Championship side at the time, which got him the Everton job. And he was recommended for that Everton job by the late Walter Smith. So, you know, um, David Moyes, that period from Man United through to Sunderland and Sociedad, yeah, he was feeling it. He was definitely questioning his ability. Guess what? He's doing pretty good at West Ham. Uh, Toxic situation? Not a toxic situation. Who knew? Who knew that a work environment could have a massive impact on your results? It's ridiculous. Um, yeah. The Nuno situation. I don't think it's the right guy for the job. I'm not saying he's a bad manager. You look at his time at Wolves. The reason why he left Wolves was to spend a year, take a sabbatical, spend some time with family, and then he's given a phone call saying, "Look, we've got a job for you." His agent goes, "You want to take some time off? Well, this is what Tottenham are offering." He was their ninth choice. That doesn't. That's not. If I'm a coach, if I'm in well, doesn't matter what job. If you are the ninth choice for a position within any job, it makes you wonder what happened to the previous eight, why they turned it down, and it makes you wonder the culture of that organisation if you're not even in the top four candidates for a position. Um, if the previous eight, who are apparently valued more than you, turn that role down, it makes you question, in my mind, the culture and the direction and the atmosphere you're going to be working in. So I'm not surprised Tottenham are struggling. They need a complete overhaul. Levy's admitted, yeah, we shouldn't have wasted all that money on the stadium. We should have got success first because there was nothing wrong with the old White Hart Lane, by the way. Yeah, so that's where all their money's gone. They went on a stadium that they didn't need, which they can't fill, which looks like a toilet bowl with no title sponsor. Who knew? Um, in regards to Steve Bruce, I think he's coached 1,000 games. You don't do that if you're shit. You don't coach 1,000 games if you're not good at what you do. He's not the best. He's solid. You know, and yeah, the way that was handled, he had no job security for most of the time he was at Newcastle. And then the abuse he faced from the fans was, don't get me wrong, I love the Newcastle fans for their passion and their loyalty to their team. But I'm sorry, Newcastle fans, you've got to hang your heads in shame for how you've acted over the last 2.5 years. I have no sympathy for your club right now. And yeah, you've now got the money and the takeover's done and Mike Ashley's gone and we're all thankful Mike Ashley's out of football. But that should have happened in 2017. You would still have Rafa Benitez as his charge if it had gone through in 2017. Sadly, it didn't. But the attitude of the fan base, it's the same with when Rafa went to Chelsea. This is why I don't like Chelsea fans as a general rule. I've got friends with Chelsea fans, I've got subscribers with Chelsea fans, and some of them are the YouTubers that I want to collaborate with at some point or do meetups with. But the way Rafa was treated by the Chelsea fans and Fernando Torres as well as a player was unacceptable, in my opinion. But and some of the Chelsea fans, as a general, there's a minority there ruin it for everyone. Some of their off-field indiscretions and misbehaviours bring the game into disrepute. I'm sorry, there are certain clubs that have a very toxic reputation for fan misbehaviour and hooliganism or ultra behaviour. They're not fans; they're thugs. Um, and it does, stain the image of the sport. A sport that has this public relations image where the fans can't be trusted to behave themselves, uh, domestically or overseas. And it's not just an English problem. Um, this is why I prefer other sports. You don't have these negative headlines where, oh, fans have misbehaved again, and then the press has something to do with that. They're not fans; they're thugs. Let's be honest with this. Um, oh, so-called fans racially or homophobically abuse players, and then they wonder why women and girls are turned off the sport. Who knew? Culture. Who knew? Um, and I'm a pragmatic man. I'm not a massive fan of this forced diversity. Okay, if women want to support the women's game and men, please feel free to support it. But do not compare the women's game to the men's game. It's a lower quality. We know that, but they're trying. And I tell you now, women's football, they don't dive. It's not tolerated in the women's game. It's just not accepted. They go in full blooded for their tackles. I will tell you that. And they're showing. I mean, a lot of them are part time, and they put more effort in. They're not paid as much. Um, they faced hurdles and barriers that the FA are partly responsible for. The FA's got to take some responsibility for putting those barriers in the way. They're facing institutions that are making it difficult for them, and then social media and the fans. There's a couple of fan pages I'm on. Christ, I'm starting to think maybe I shouldn't follow them anymore. It's ridiculous, especially to do with female commentators and the hatred towards them. I've never seen any hatred towards Claire Balding or Gabby Logan. They've been part of or Sue Barker. They've been part of sporting institutions for the best part of 40 years. I think Sue Barker goes back to the 60s, 70s when she was playing tennis professionally. You know, um, do I think Juventus will sack Allegri? Well, look, Juventus are declining now. Their period of, as I said, their period of dominance is coming to an end, and the rest of Italian football is becoming more competitive again, which is good. So, but constantly sacking the manager doesn't bring success unless you're Chelsea. So there you go. I think it's more of a football. Yeah, I think there is a minority in society who are living in the Stone Age. I couldn't care if you've got a female lines touch judge. I don't think we call them linesmen or lineswomen anymore. I think we call them touch judges now. Um, I couldn't care if the referee's a woman. I couldn't care if one of the assistant coaches is a woman. I couldn't care if the commentator, as long as they're capable at their job and good enough to do what they're doing, and and they've got the respect of the players that they're officiating or coaching. I don't care. I do not care, quite frankly. And the abuse that officials face from players, especially in football, is ridiculous. You just don't see it in other sports. Other sports, you get lengthy suspensions for abuse of an official. Lengthy, be it verbal or physical, lengthy. Football, they call them every name under the sun, and they're not getting suspended. Xavi, he seems to be quite happy at El Sad, and he's actually said um, that he has no plans on leaving his current job. He's given the support of the club that he's at. Yeah, it's a lower level. It's obviously less competitive or a lower level of football in the sense of quality. But if you've got job security, why go to a place that doesn't have job security, where another club legend in Ronald Koeman has been thrown under the bus? Um, that's my opinion on that one. No, in the UK, we've got women referees, we've got women linos in British ice hockey. It's been quite commonplace over here in the UK and the European leagues for quite some time. That's an NHL, AHL, ECIHL issue, I think. But no, we have women referees and women linos officiating. I've definitely seen it in the British leagues, and I have seen it in the European continental competitions like the Champions Hockey League and stuff. Um, There's not a lot of them, but there's enough for them to go that they are a significant minority of officials, and they are very, very competent at what they do. And again, I say this with refereeing. There's a reason why, especially football, that there's an issue with getting people to become referees. The abuse they face, and if you're going by the letter of the rules, or as we say, the letter of the law, when it comes to football, um, you look at rugby union, which I will be watching in just over an hour's time, the women's test match between England and New Zealand. When the referee is fully marked up is calling the captains over or the two players that are involved, let's say in a bit of foul play, they shut up. Then the referee may have a conversation with the captains where they are, yes, yes, sir or madam. You've got 5 minutes. You've got a minute to talk to your players. Okay, here's the situation, and it's definitely a completely. Oh God! Oh dear! Oh dear! I've got some sad news. My aunt's just passed away. Yeah, I'll deal with that in a minute. I'll deal with that in a minute. Um, yeah, my great aunt's just passed away, but she'd been ill for years, so um, I feel sorry for my uncle, but my great uncle, who I'm very close to, but my family's complicated. But that's something I can deal with another time. Well, look, the last time I saw her, she was barely compos mentis, but she'd been ill for a very, very long time. So she didn't really know what was going on for the last 4 years, 5 years. She really didn't. Um, and there's so it's something that, like, I've had a lot of bereavements in the last 11 years, 12 years. Yeah, not much you can do really. You just gotta, in my opinion, I don't get as emotional over bereavements as some relatives. I just take it on the chin. Um, you can't let it affect you. So yeah, it is what it is. It happens. It always seems to happen on a weekend with me as well. I'm not joking. Jo- Some weird reason. It either happens on wedding anniversaries, weekends. Sundays are the worst day for bereavements in my family, for some reason. Or dead on the hour as well for some reason. Dead on time. Not like a minute past or something. It's weird. Something really weird goes on with my family and friends where they literally snuff it at like, oh yes, I'm going to die dead on 12 o'clock. Why? Why not like why not like 7 minutes past? Just be a bit different. Just be a bit different. No, I'm gonna do it now. Like my granddad. My granddad went like, oh, I've been married 61 years, like at midnight. I'm gonna go, sod it, love. I don't want to, no, I'm done. I've got to pick you in this. No, I'm done. I'm gonna watch Coronation Street on ITV player in the armchair, drink a cup of tea, and I'm gonna die now. I'm not gonna. I no, not officially. Officially, he dies. No, no. Officially, we are not announced in the morning. No, 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 no. I'm dying now. 61 years. I've had enough. We're in the newspaper last year. I've had my moment of fame. Sod off. And my granddad was a funny character. Um, Very funny stories. Die-hard Liverpool fan. Built his own little football in his garden. He built his own. Oh God, crazy stuff. He built like a football goal, a little like penalty area in his garden, and it was hilarious. Bear in mind, this guy had a heart condition, so he had a pacemaker, and even when I was a kid, you could hear it ticking away because this is when pacemakers were big, fucking huge things. It's like a tick. You felt like you had like a clock bomb, like weird. Never hug him. It was weird. It was uncomfortable. And you think he's going to drop dead at any moment, quite literally. And then he would stop. You think, oh God, he's granddad had a heart attack, and he would just go, wind me up, and he'll get a little key out of his pocket. Can you wind me up? It's just weird. It freaked me out. Um, but he was a diehard Liverpool fan. My dad used to play non-league football for Dorchester Town. So football's been part of like my upbringing. Sport's been a part of my upbringing for a long time. But yeah, wasn't expecting that news. But I'm just going to inject some humour. But my aunt wasn't very nice to one of her daughters, and this is where I don't tolerate homophobia, racism, and sexism. Don't like it. Um, my cousin's a lesbian, okay, and her sister and her parents and my extended family didn't treat her very nicely, um, and she doesn't talk to us anymore. And that's not my fault. I was a kid at the time. I didn't know any of this until I was obviously much older. And I have a view that, yeah, I don't tolerate any kind of discrimination, in any form because I've seen it. And My mum, thankfully, and my dad were were brilliant with me. When I went to school, there was a lot of kids from all different backgrounds, and so I learned to be accepting. Hate is taught. You're not born for the hate. You're taught to hate. That's my viewpoint. Seriously, you're not. But and this is where the whole social media, where there's even young kids who are like 11, 12 years old sending death threats to players and officials. It's like, on what planet do you think that's acceptable? And obviously, if you look at the other channel, and I've done a couple of live streams recently, we've had a member of parliament here in the UK murdered. That's 2 in 5 years or something. One on the left, centre left, one on the centre right, um, killed by fanatical loony bins. So both of them have been, given, are they mentally capable of standing trial, whatever. And it takes one idiot to look at these social media things and actually go, well, these are public figures. They're quite easy to get at. I'm going to act. So that's why I don't accept any form of bigotry. I and yeah, what we've seen, um, in recent times with social media, it saddens me. And yes, certain sports seem to have a bigger problem than others. And yes, there have been, um, rugby union or ice hockey. There's a minority. There is a minority. And when we hear, like, with what's going on with the Chicago Blackhawks right now, I link it back into what happened to Babcock and Bill Peters a couple of seasons ago, where they were sacked for basically assaulting and racially abusing players and bullying players. Bill Peters was at the Blackhawks organisation at the time that the abuse scandal was happening. He racially abused a player. Aldrich sexually abused a player. There is, again, sporting culture, this win at all costs culture, where they didn't do anything. And then I was watching an interview that Robin Leonard, the Vegas goaltender, who's had his own issues with mental health and addiction, and he's been very open and honest about that. He's been heavily critical of the NHLPA and their handling of the initial allegations all the way up to right now, because obviously, Beach stopped playing in the NHL, AHL, and he went over to Europe to play. So now he's no longer a member of the NHLPA. Um, you know, well, my ex-girlfriend, right? My ex-girlfriend said, "I don't believe in mixed race babies. I think it's wrong." My cousin's a mixed race. Within 3 weeks, we're not together anymore. But ironically, she left me. So there you go. And yeah, like, jog on then. And when her sister got arrested for racially abusing a police officer, I just laughed. I was like, "Well, and then you're claiming you're not a racist family, but your actions tell different." Um, yeah, hate's taught. It's not learned; it's taught. Um, you're taught to hate. You're not born for the hate. You're taught. Um, Nurture nature kind of thing. It sort of sums it up. In regards to having women officials, yeah, it, it is sad. I mean, you're just officiating. You're not playing the game. You're just telling the players behave, basically. Um, I'm going to be watching the rugby later. All women officials. There might be a couple of male officials there, but when the referee and the touch judges in rugby league, and to a certain extent rugby union, well, no, rugby union and to a certain extent rugby league, when they're talking, they're fully mic'd up, so the audience at home plus in the stadium can hear what's being said. And when a player f bombs, they get a warning. When they f bomb again, they're off. If they continue to spew, crap at the officials, they get given a warning. They're off. Ice hockey, I mean, yeah, there's a bit of chirping that happens, and there's a bit of banter, but if it's criticising the referee's integrity, they're off. If they abuse an official, even if they accidentally nudge him, they're off. They get suspended. They're in trouble. Football, for some reason, I think Paolo Di Canio is the prime example in the Premier League when he pushed the referee over. His ban was a joke. His ban was a joke. He didn't get as long as he should have. He did not get as long as he should have. Juventus, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, or Man United? Who's the biggest club? That is an interesting one. Man United have spent time in the second division, so automatically, in my opinion, they're they've been relegated at some point. So, um, in that regard, they've had a period of less success. Yeah, there was a period when they're in the second division and they didn't win the league title for 20 or 25 years or something. So, um, yeah, Bayern Munich only started winning trophies in the 70s. They weren't successful before then. Um, Barcelona, Madrid, and Real Madrid have never been relegated from La Liga, but that league is not that hard not to get relegated from because it's so uncompetitive. Juventus have had their match fixing scandals, but all those clubs at some point have had financial difficulty. Oh yeah, Real Madrid and Barcelona have been bailed out by state banks. They've had state money to survive. So all of them are toxic. Couldn't care less. Munich, I think, are the most lovable out of those because they're anti-fascist in their history, whereas Juventus, there's a hint of links to the fascist state of the 20s and 30s under Mussolini. I prefer Torino. Torino has actually got the biggest support in Turin over Juventus. Um, um, Again, that's looking at the history of the clubs and knowing the history of the clubs. So for me, Munich are the most lovable, but I'm not a fan of Munich really with how they've conducted themselves recently, where they go, "Oh, we're being there's competitive teams. We'll take their best players because we can." Um, Buying success basically, but the German model sort of controls greed a little bit, so I prefer Munich. Prefer Munich. But on fan base, Juventus, 60% of Italian football fans are Juventus fans. So on fan base, Juventus for a national scale, Man United, I would think on a global scale, are a bigger global brand. Madrid and Barcelona are more toxic. Um, so that's a difficult question. I don't support any of those teams, so that's a difficult question for me. Um, and for trophies won, Rangers have won the most domestic most club trophies in history. So where so on success, you could then go, oh, but it's quality of opposition, quality of league. You still got to win. Um, Nigel Owens, you obviously had Gareth Thomas, league and union player for Wales. 107 caps, I think, in union. Um, I'll get to the El Clasico. It's got a lot of politics and nationalism behind it. It goes back to the Franco period, which was a very nasty period in Spanish history that I don't think a lot of Spanish want to remember. Others remember it quite fondly, depending on where you're from. Yeah, but Nigel Owens. The reason why Nigel Owens is now he's now retired as a ref now is with so respect because he was good at his job. His sexuality had nothing to do with how good he was, and he didn't come out until quite late in his refereeing career. So there is that. Nigel Owens has a good rapport with the players. The players respect him because he's good at what he does, and he has a sense of humour as well. He's so funny, but he's dealt with mental health problems and an eating disorder while he was the best referee in the world. He's a very interesting character. Read his biography. There's a documentary about him as well. He's really interesting. Listen to the interviews he gives. His viewpoint on how the game is refereed, how the rules are written. He is critical of the game at times and some of the directions the game is taking. At no point do I care he's a homosexual. No. Does it bother me? No. It bothers me. When he first came on the scene as a referee, he was a little bit whistle happy as an international ref. And I was thinking, just let the game flow. But I was a little bit critical. I was younger, but I was like, I was thinking to myself, you need to let the game flow a bit more. He grew into his role as a referee, and by the time he ended, every international team were like, "Can we have him to referee our game, please?" Like when a test match was announced, you have to have a neutral referee in a test match. By the way, you cannot be from one of the other countries. So yeah, when there was like Ireland versus Scotland, they were like, "Can we please have Nigel Owens as our ref?" Like the unions were begging to have him. Joubert as well was another one who was well respected. There's a couple who've become household names in rugby union. Um, and But no, when it comes to there are some funny videos on the internet of Nigel Owens and his banter with the players when he's refereeing. Like he does have a sense of humour, and he will put players in their place as well. And the respect he gets from the players is, you know, they love him. The playing group, past and present, love him. Um, and It's a shame he's obviously retired, but he's decided enough's enough. Getting older, body's catching up. he's done a bit of commentary as well, and a bit of analysis for TV. So he's very, very good on the TV as well when he analyses. When they ask him what's the referee seeing in the situation, as a referee, how would you referee the situation with a high shot or whatever? So he's very good at breaking down the rules of the game, analysing the game as a fan because he is a rugby fan through and through. Um, um, Talking about El Clasico, Barcelona is Catalan, Real Madrid is the Royal Club, which had links to the fascists supporting of Franco. Franco was not very keen on Catalan nationalism. It's a very toxic hate. It's a rivalry of hatred, basically. Um, it's got enough. And Espanyol Barcelona is another little rivalry that gets overlooked because Espanyol is the pro Madrid club, whereas Barcelona is the pro independence club as well. Toxic. Atletico is the working class club. Real Madrid is the middle class club. Um, and so yeah, those rivalries are. It's you have just read up on the Franco era in Spain and the Spanish Civil War. Take the sport out of it, you'll understand why the regional Spain is very regional. Same with Italy. You'll understand why there's such hatred within that rivalry. Um, uh, yeah, the new logo of Juventus is shocking. I like the old logo with the is it the panther or the lion that's on the jersey. The new logo with the double J looks shit. They tried the rebranding; it doesn't look very good. Um, yeah, Atletico, but then you got Athletic Bilbao. Barcelona is another really heated rivalry. Just yeah, because you got Basque nationalism and Catalan nationalism, and they were on the same side in the Spanish Civil War, but then the it sort of went a bit skew with, and yeah, um, the Basques became a bit more terroristic, a bit more terrorism to their nationalist movement, and it got a bit nasty in the Franco era. And Bilbao and Barcelona hate each other. They've never been relegated from La Liga. Bilbao is the fourth or fifth most successful club all time. They have a homegrown recruitment policy. Um, yeah, Bilbao Barcelona rivalry is probably even more nasty than the El Clasico, but it doesn't get reported as much. Um, the that's to do with like again tribalism. That goes back to the Industrial Revolution, I'm afraid. In order for Manchester to make its money, the goods had to go through the port of Liverpool. So it goes back to the 1830s of the rivalry between the two cities economically. Manchester's economy, until the railways came along in the 1840s and 1850s, 1860s, and then with industrialisation, was heavily reliant on the port of Liverpool to export its goods that it made in its factories. So if the Scousers wanted to go on strike, the Manchester factories lost money, and then it comes down to yeah, regional rivalry. You know, Man United dominating in the 50s or becoming dominant in the 50s, then Liverpool in the 60s and 70s and 80s, then Man United in the 90s and 2000s. But it's the same with Blackburn, Burnley, Preston. All the founders of the Liverpool weren't founders of the Football League. Newton Heath, what became Manchester United, were. So there's local bragging rights. City rivalries are very, very common. Regional rivalries are very, very common. It's like, is it Macclesfield and Chesterfield? Or Mansfield and Chesterfield? That goes back to the miners' strike with their hatred, because I think one town didn't go on strike and kept going to work, and the other town went on strike and didn't go to work. And that's a little rivalry in the coalfields of the Midlands that's nasty. Palace, Brighton, no one knows why that's a rivalry, really. It just became one. But yeah, there's always a lot of. Oh, Pierluigi Collina is the referee you're talking about. He had to retire because of a sponsorship deal he had a sponsorship deal with, I think, a car company, and they were also sponsoring one of the clubs, and so there was a conflict of interest. So he went, you know what, I'm going to retire. But Collina was the best referee ever. Pierluigi Collina, the guy with the big egg head, looked, yeah, big bulging eyes. He was the best referee, very well respected. Um, Uh, I'm not surprised at all. Notice the three clubs that are still obsessed with this European Super League. Real Madrid won no trophies last season. Barcelona are bankrupt, and Juve had just sacked their manager and finished, I think, fourth or fifth. I think it was last season. So I'm not surprised at all. Liverpool, I don't know. I think there is no definite saying this is the biggest rivalry in football or the biggest rivalry in sports because that is a subjective opinion. Um, the oldest rivalry in any sport is England Scotland when it comes, I think, to rugby union. That's the oldest rivalry in sport. That's the oldest rivalry in sport. Um, whenever someone goes to me, biggest rivalry in sport, that's subjective. Yes, they're global. Um, uh, Again, you're looking at, subjectively in someone's opinion. Someone else's opinion might be different. Like River Plate, Boca Juniors, for example, Neil's Young Boys, the Buenos Aires, like Rosario, those kind of derbies and stuff. Corinthians, Sao Paulo. Oh God. Um, you've got some of them, some of the clubs in South America. Then you've got, the Sydney Roosters, Sydney Rabbitohs rivalry in the NRL because they're foundation clubs. They hate each other. Back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, if you were walking on the wrong side of the street, you were getting stabbed in Sydney. No joke. Um, then you've got you know some of the original six rivalries in the NHL. It's more the players giving it the brutality than the fans. But again, biggest rival, the North London derby, Arsenal Tottenham. I think is the biggest one. Um, Chelsea, I don't know with Chelsea because in West London you've got a lot of clubs in a very small area. So you've got Chelsea, Fulham, Brentford, all very close together. Uh, uh, their fan base also goes into Surrey and Berkshire and Buckinghamshire, where they have their catchment, so to speak, because they're competing for fans. West Ham, Millwall, it's a weird rivalry, but that's to do with dock workers in the industry of East and South London. Um, yeah, there's a reason for that. There's a lot of reasons for that. Fan behaviour is one thing. It just is what it is. London's the interesting thing with London, and this is where I find it funny when I'm looking at the major leagues in North America, where they go, how many teams can a fan base, how many teams can a metropolitan area support on a professional level? I'm going to try and list off all the professional football clubs in Greater London because I'm including some of the outlying areas that historically were part of other counties. Chelsea, Brentford, Fulham, um, Wimbledon, um, I think Kingston Rovers, Hampton Court and Kingston Rovers, Kingston upon Thames. They've got a semi-professional club. The Metropolitan Police have their own club. You've got Leighton Orient, Charlton Athletic, Crystal Palace, Millwall, West Ham, Leighton Orient, Barnet, um, Arsenal, Tottenham. I think I've got them all. I think that's about 10, 12 clubs there in Greater London. And then on top of that, you've got the non-league clubs as well. So I think I've got Kingston in there, Kingston upon Thames. And then just on the outside of London, you've got Watford, you've got Gillingham. Um, the second city derby. But then you've got Wolves, West Brom as well. Walsall is another club that's got a solid hardcore in the Black Country. And when they get a cup tie against the bigger club, it gets nasty. No, I don't think Liverpool's the most respected. There's a lot of hatred towards Liverpool as a club. A lot of the antics of their fans in the 70s and 80s leave a lot to be desired. When I say fans, I mean hooligans. Can the MLS be a top five league in the next? No. The only way the MLS can grab market share in the US and Canada is if the other major leagues have lockouts or player strikes. And I do think the Major League Baseball is the most open to a lockout because there's no salary cap. I think Major League Baseball is the most exposed league to player unrest. Although, with what's happened in the NHL in recent days with the Chicago Blackhawks scandal, there is a lot of pressure being now put upon the NHLPA from the player base, and players, individual players are going, you failed not just one individual, because there's a second unnamed player in that lawsuit who also raised concerns to management at the Chicago at the time, which may actually be Alou, I think, because he obviously raised concerns about racist behaviour from his coach in the organisation. The NHL narrowly avoided, and I will say this, narrowly avoided a lockout in regards to the Olympic participation, return to play, and the current collective bargaining agreement with the expansion with Seattle. It was a bit squeaky bum time. There was a concern that the NHL was going to go, no, we're going to go on a lockout. Major League Baseball last year narrowly avoided a lockout. They went down to the 11th hour. Major League Baseball, for me, is the most exposed to player unrest and a lockout or strike. If that happens, it's a summer league. What league in the US takes place in the summer? Major League Soccer. They are praying for labour unrest within the playing group of Major League Baseball. They're praying for that. This is what the CFL found when there was the lockout 2004-2005. The viewership of the CFL in Canada went through the roof because there was no NHL hockey on. They grew their market share. They grew their profits, which helped the league out medium term. They've still got financial problems, but it bolstered the league for a while. Major League Rugby as well actually takes place in the summer, not the winter. So again, if Major League Baseball has any labour dispute or strike, and the Major League Baseball's had player strikes and lockouts before, and I've done a history video on the history of labour unrest within the MLS and Major League Baseball. Major League Soccer, and to a certain extent Major League Rugby, can go, we've got dissatisfied sports fans who are angry with a league. They've got no sport to watch, apart from NASCAR, really. We're active team sports right now. We want to grow our brand. Come on, come watch us. And they will aggressively. But I've noticed something. The MLS faces a struggle. And that's to do with the European football, the European leagues, or in Dan's case, he'll call it soccer. I'm a big NHL fan, as you know, and when I'm watching NHL broadcasts, I don't know what the current with the new TV deal. I'm not so sure because NBC doesn't have the NHL anymore. It's now ESPN and regional broadcasters. The Premier League and the other European leagues and Champions League and Europa League are advertised during NHL games, or were under NBC. I'm not so sure with the current TV agreement because of TV rights. I think NBC have the Premier League and the European League rights, whereas ESPN doesn't. But I did notice when NBC had the rights. Now you've obviously got Fox and all the regional stations that like Altitude Sports for Colorado games, for example, who will carry broadcasts. You've got TSN and Sportsnet in Canada. They have different agreements with the European sports leagues for their content. But I did notice that not only were they advertising, if they were advertising European hockey, I'd be like, that's cool. You're growing the game because you actually target. No, they were advertising a different sport and an overseas league. They weren't advertising the MLS. They were advertising, because the MLS takes place most in the summer, they're advertising the Premier League. That's what I found really interesting. Really interesting. ESPN, I don't believe, has the rights. I think it's NBC in the US has the rights for the Premier League and the European football. The NBA, for example, massively popular in Australia because Australia's got a very good basketball league, some very good players, and it's professional in Australia, both men and women's. So the NBA basketball very popular in Australia. But it is interesting. The Chelsea headhunters, I actually know some ex-headhunters, and I know some ex Portsmouth. What's the Portsmouth? The 635 crew, whatever it is, the old Portsmouth firm. I know a couple of lads who were part of that back in the day. How come United turn up against City but not against Liverpool? Tactics. It's the tactics the opposition employ. Liverpool's tactics don't suit United's style. It's also a psychological thing. I think Liverpool are the better side over City long term. I think the tactics that are employed um, by the teams. Liverpool's tactics seem to suit that rivalry right now. Seems to suit that team. Um, Personally, I think it's the tactics employed more than. But I think Klopp's got Solskjaer's number, and I think there is a psychological impact in there as well. That United aren't dominant anymore, and as the pendulum swung again, um, does this every decade or so. That rivalry is a heated rivalry, though. It's not a nice rivalry. There's a lot of hatred there, and again, it's industrial. It goes beyond sport with the dislike between the two cities. I think Man United's are well, the squad's unbalanced. It's a legacy of the Ed Woodward time in charge, as in director of I think it was I don't know, Ed Woodward's role within the club and the Glaziers' ownership. Um, it's been a troubled ownership. There's a legacy of debt at the club, and some really dodgy transfers. Bristol is the most underperforming city because it's got two professional clubs. Bristol City, Bristol Rovers. That for me in terms of football. Nottingham's had success, obviously, with Nottingham Forest and Notts County historically. So Bristol, for me, is the most underperforming city when it comes to professional football in this country. Um, Sheffield's had the great history. Birmingham, the West Midlands had a great history. Liverpool as a city. Well, Merseyside's got a lot of professional teams, so that's great history there. Manchester, Glasgow, Edinburgh. In the UK, I would say it's Bristol. Bristol for me, um, most underperforming. Even Swindon have been in the Premier League. Even Oldham, which is part of Greater Manchester, which is a separate town by the way, but it's part of Greater Manchester now. Historically, part of Lancashire has been in the Premier League, so Bristol is for me. I think Chelsea at the moment currently are favourites to win the league, in my opinion. But we haven't even got into November yet, so let's see what happens come January the 1st. Let's see who gets through the festive period the best. Let's see who manages injuries the best. Obviously, COVID's not going away, so we're going to get sick this bugs. Yeah, London could form its own professional league. London's got more professional clubs than the SPL, so London, London could have its own professional standalone league if we're being honest. Out of the number of teams in that city, the World Junior Classic. What's that? World Junior Classic. I'm assuming that's ice hockey. No. Mourinho, he's an impact manager as a short term impact. He doesn't last very long. He wears thin on players. He's an impact manager. You throw him in for a couple of seasons and then he moves on. He's not a guy who's going to be there like a Ferguson or a Wenger for a long period of time. He's an impact guy. He's there. Yeah, his style of football is defence based. Well, Bristol City's owner owns the Bristol Bears Rugby Union Club, so he's got a bit of money. So Bristol City has a bit of money. Bristol Rovers. There's been both clubs have had issues with finances. Both of them have nearly gone bust over the years. But it's interesting. Yeah, Mourinho as a manager, he is very difficult. He's a big ego in management, big ego. But ironically, he started his coaching career at Barcelona as an interpreter, and he was a journalist as well. And then he got into coaching, and he started at Barcelona. Ironically, his first management gig was obviously at Porto, but he started at Barcelona. So, but then he goes to Real Madrid. So that's an interesting subplot in itself. Mourinho, he is very, very difficult to work with. Why? It's just the same with Athletic, got Wigan Athletic, Charlton Athletic, the Latics, Rovers. It's United City. It's a Yeah, it's one of them. It's just one of them. It's just a thing. And most Rovers clubs are playing quarts or halves. You'll notice as well. At some point in their history, they have two primary colours, which is interesting as well. Doncaster Rovers playing hoops, Bristol Rovers and Blackburn Rovers playing halves. Um, or Harlequin style, where you've got quarts or halves, where you've got the checkerboard style. It's just really interesting. Yeah, I mean the Bristol Rovers are Bristol City owners are not. I don't particularly like what his plans for rugby, his proposals. Um, I've got a friend who actually plays for Bristol Bears rugby as well. So yeah, I don't know. He's invested a lot in Bristol, but they haven't got any success yet. Although the Bristol Bears in rugby union are doing quite well this season. Um, yeah, imagine if Mourinho. Mourinho is one of those impact managers. Uh, but after a while it wears thin on the playing group. It's a win. He's a win now manager. You put him in to win now. He's not there to build a team to win in 10 years' time and longevity. He's brought in to win now. Owners will go. He can win. He has an immediate win record. He wins now. The only club he didn't win any silverware at is Tottenham. He's won everywhere else. So it'd be interesting to see what happens at Roma if they actually have some success and some silverware under him. Because it's been a long time since Roma won anything. So he's there as a win now manager, stopgap kind of get them to win now, and then we'll build the success off the back of that. But he's a hard taskmaster. He's not. I wouldn't say he's a player's manager. He's an owner's manager. He gets you results. Um, some players like his method, some players don't. Um, he obviously has his battles with the media, which are famous. No, I don't think so. Um, Man City, I don't think they have had the success without win now managers in recent years. Kidderminster, Hamilton Academical, Inverness Caledonian Thistle. That's a good one. That's a merger club where two clubs merged together to form Inverness Caledonian Thistle. Hamilton Academical, that's an interesting one. Kidderminster Harriers, Rushton and Diamonds back in the day. Remember them? They've gone out of business now. You had some just have the place name like Havant and Waterlooville or Dagenham and Redbridge. Dover Athletics, another one. They've had a lot of problems recently. They're really in trouble. Um, there are some clubs with very unique names. Partick Thistle. So Thistle's quite Ross County, even though Airdrieonians. That's a weird one. Stenhouse Mule. There you go. There's a real St Johnston playing Perth. There you go. St Johnston Saints. Weird one that. You've got Hearts and Hibs. Heart of Midlothian because Midlothian is the historical region. Hibernian. Some of this little sectarian, a bit of sectarianism. Everyone thinks the old firm is the only sectarianism in Scottish football, but not. Um, you've got Partick, Rangers, and Celtic in Glasgow. Really strange names there. If you think about it, so Partick, Queen of the South is another interesting one. Um, Greenock Morton, Airdrieonians, Alloa Athletic, uh, Queens Park Rangers, Preston North End. Although Rangers is Queens Park is a little bit. I've got QPR off my London list as well. They're another London club in the west of London. Crystal Palace. They're named after the Crystal Palace exhibition, ironically. But it was not actually in that part of London. So there you go. You've got Leighton Orient. Where's the Orient come from? That's a weird one. The Dons, the Milton Keynes Dons, is because the nickname of Wimbledon is the Dons. Wimbledon, AFC Wimbledon, Athletic Football Club Wimbledon. There you go. Uh, West Bromwich Albion, the Albion bit is a weird one. Aston Villa is just the Aston area of the Villa, um, but Aston's just a part of Birmingham. The Wanderers, so Bolton and Wolverhampton have got Wanderers in their name. Everton, you know, Tranmere Rovers, they're obviously at Birkenhead and the Wirral. There's a lot of weird ones. Well, it'll be interesting with Mourinho's history in Italian football, coaching some of their biggest rivals like Roma and Inter. That'll be a very interesting one. But Italian football managers do go around. It'd be more interesting if he coached Torino and then goes to Juventus, because that's a city divide you do not want to cross. Um, Same with Lazio and Roma. You don't see players and coaches going across the city divide. So that's an interesting one. Very, very interesting one. And we'll just have to see how it plays out. We'll just have to see how that plays out. Accrington Stanley. There's another Stanley. Where does that come from? Interesting football name. It's the same with rugby as well. There's some like Wasps, Saracens. London Irish was set up by people born in Ireland who went over to play rugby. You've got London Scottish, London Japanese. You have to have traditionally to play for those clubs. Originally, you had to have heritage from those countries. So London Welsh, London Scottish, London Japanese. That's an interesting club. London Irish. Originally, when it was amateur days, you had to have some kind of link, with your ancestry to one of those countries, and they were normally set up by expats, especially London Japanese. That's an interesting one because they're all Japanese citizens who wanted to play rugby, which is really interesting. Why isn't Ireland a more successful football country? The Gaelic Amateur Association and the fact that the Irish League has no money. The Irish League doesn't have a lot of money. Same with Northern Ireland as well. Not a lot of money. It was part time until the 80s. Crowd numbers were started to fall quite rapidly in the 90s. The Gaelic Amateur Association obviously is actually the most, so hurling and Gaelic football are more popular. They get bigger. That's why Croke Park's the biggest stadium in Ireland. That's where their grand finals are played. Rugby union as well is better run in Ireland, and there's more success for the Irish national side. And there's a lot of politics and social history behind how it's seen as a garrison sport. So in Ireland, the football's mostly played in Dublin, is where the history of the sport really is. Which is so in the regional areas of Ireland, it's more Gaelic Amateur Association. Plus, you've got to look at the population size as well. It's not a very big population base. You've got a lot of sports being played. Got to compete for talent, and that's another issue as well. Is more kids play Gaelic amateur sports at school, and rugby union at school. So and then it's down to the money, the education system, grassroots, and also the social and political history of Ireland as well has a massive part to play in the development of the sport. In recent years, yes, it has improved, but it's one of the weaker leagues in the European league system on the UEFA coefficient. And while the league itself is really fun, it's got a lot of structural problems. There's not a lot of player depth and talent depth below the top tier. They've had to combine the two top tiers into one. It's a summer league as well, so it's a shorter season. I wouldn't say Ireland's pretty much poor in every sport. Rugby union, they're very, very good. World class rugby union setup. But it's because of the Gaelic Amateur Association. It's also population size as well. That has something to do with it. There's a lot of cultural things to do with it. But you look at people of Irish descent overseas in the US and Canada, the Southern Hemisphere, like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and that's a problem as well as emigration from Ireland in the last 150 years, where you've lost some of your best athletes to what was the British Empire, so the Commonwealth. A lot of them obviously came over. There's a lot of people of Irish descent applying their sport and their trade in the mainland UK and Northern Ireland. And they've registered to play for Scotland, Wales, England, Northern Ireland, because you can get dual nationality. It's a very complex issue with the political side of things there. So yeah, emigration overseas, and the fact that their most successful sport internationally is rugby union. They've had some success with football at World Cups where they've got to the knockout stages and they qualify for a lot more tournaments than Scotland, ironically, and they've been more successful than Scotland at international football, which is really weird considering that Scotland had a very good side in the 70s and 80s and they just didn't get it together in tournaments. They just qualified and didn't do anything. I've made my views clear on the Qatar World Cup. No, England. I think no, Ireland still, I think, compete with New Zealand, South Africa, England, Wales, Australia. They've won the Six Nations multiple times. It's just in the World Cup they just can't get past the quarter final. That's it. They just can't get past the quarter final of the World Cup. But on the international stage, they have beaten the All Blacks convincingly more than once. They've beaten South Africa. They've beaten Australia. They've beaten England and Wales. They've won Grand Slams. It's just the World Cup where they don't get the cycle right. They peak during the World Cup cycle and then don't get it right at the World Cup because they've already peaked. Why Italian? No, it's not the only sport the Italians play. I've spent a lot of time in Italy. You just go to every community, there's a football pitch. Every community, there's a football pitch, be it an AstroTurf or just a football pitch. That's community owned. That's why you have a grassroots. You may not have the full the professional game may have money problems at the lower levels, and a lot of clubs go out of business and reform all the time. But football pitches, you have community football pitches, and there's one. Italians are actually quite good at rugby. There's a very solid rugby grassroots level in Italy. It's very well played. Ice hockey, they've got a very, very competitive ice hockey. They've got a very competitive handball league. Athletics. There are a lot of community clubs, basically. Skiing, the winter sports, they're very good at as well. But yeah, football is the national sport in Italy because every town and village has a football pitch. But they are very good at some of the other sports, like handball, like volleyball, like basketball, swimming. They've got a good record at swimming. Boxing, they've got a good history in boxing as well. Because every sports club is a community club, basically. Every community will have the community sports club where they'll have a whole variety of sports under the town name or the village name. The community buys into ice hockey, swimming, athletics, basketball, volleyball, rowing. They're quite good. Cycling, they have some amazing cycling history. They've got the Giro on the three big tours. You know, they've got a lot of professional cyclists. But no, football they're very good at because, well, they've invested a lot of time into it. Their professional league structure is very deep. They've got a lot of professional semi. Their football ladder is deeper, I think, than England's footballing ladder. The community side of the game, I think, is far better organised than our community side of the game because they have more playing pitches that are actually properly maintained by the community clubs. You pay your membership in all the clubs, you know. Rugby's got a good solid footing in Italy as well. Ice hockey's got a good solid footing. They may not be the most successful internationally, but national-wise, a lot of people are registered to play. But they just love team sports. They're a very sporty country. The success on the international stage is a different thing altogether, but they are a very sporty country. And they are pretty decent at ice hockey. Just watch the World Championships; they're pretty good. They've got some good players who play in the European leagues. They are pretty good. Handball, volleyball. I think they're the best. I think they're right now they're the best footballing nation in the world. Yes, it is the most cared sport, but they have their own standalone sports newspapers, the Gazette dello Sport, and some of their editors have said, "Why can't football be like rugby, where the fans behave themselves?" Spain are a lot more further off than I think you realise. They don't play with a centre forward, and their tactics are dated. Tiki-taki's had its day. Belgium, they choke in the tournaments. They're really great qualifying, and they're ranked really high. Comes to tournaments, they fall apart. They haven't got the depth. Um, their starting squad and their extended squad is their best players. There is no the domestic league's crap. Um, they haven't got as much depth as people realise. They're not as good as they used to be. Um, uh, it's where the hotbed of the game. North of Rome is the hotbed of the game. You look at the amount of titles won by clubs south of Rome; it's not many. One title for Cagliari in Sardinia. Napoli's had a couple. Bari had a good side in the late 80s, early 90s. They've had financial problems. Ancona have got the worst top flight record in footballing history with 5 points in a season. The 2003-2004 Ancona side was the worst team ever. Lecce, solid fan base, but again, lack of success. It's like rugby league in English, in the Super League. Most of the rugby league clubs take is the historical heartland of the sport. It's the industrial centre. Um, it's all to do with how the game started up in Italy, with British industrialists going over to Italy and setting up teams. Plain and simple. It's the same with the northwest of England and the Midlands being the founders of the Football League, with a couple of Sheffield and Nottingham clubs. Again, the rugby league traditionally north of England, football traditionally the Midlands and bit of Yorkshire in the northwest. It's like football in Scotland is predominantly the border region. It's your cultural and significant history and the historical regions of where the game was originally played. It's like ice hockey in Canada. The original six is mostly East Coast and mostly in that little border region. That's the hotbed of hockey. Um, French football was weird because it's scattered all over the country. But rugby league and rugby union, southwest. You look at the French top flight in rugby union, mostly in the southwest. Um, Rugby league, southwest. Even the semi-professional ranks and the amateur ranks of rugby league, southwest. That's the traditional hotbed of the sport. Um, but France is a very interesting country because football is not the most popular sport. The viewership figures, if you break down the TV viewership figures and fan figures, multiple sports have you get the pie chart out and it's weird. It looks like pizza. Um, yeah, southwest of France, both codes of rugby. You just look at the history of French rugby league and French rugby union. There's a lot of politics behind that as well, where during especially during it, and they played it in secret. You go to prison for playing it. Basically, it was seen as a British sport, so therefore it's the enemy sport. And when the Nazis completely occupied all of France in 40, I think it was 42, when the Vichy regime fully collapsed in 43. It was seen as an act of soft resistance. So you could be in prison for playing it. So there's a lot of reasons why both codes of rugby are very regional in France, and they don't particularly like the centralisation of government. Um, yeah, I mean Australia's not very good at ice hockey. We're better at that. But yeah, I wouldn't say France is good at most sports. Rugby union, rugby league to a point. They've got a decent national side. They've got some decent clubs. Football, um, ice hockey. France were not as successful as they used to be. They're now ranked below us in ice hockey terms. We relegated them from the World Championships, by the way, which rub hands with glee there. Um, but France, much like the UK, we're integral to the IOC and the FIFA. If it wasn't for the French, we wouldn't have the modern Olympics. So you got to give the French that, and we also drove the modern Olympics as well. Um, Without the British Empire and the French Empire and Britain and France before World War One driving the modern Olympics, we don't have it. and that's why the IOC and FIFA and UEFA have offices in France, not over here, because they were the driving forces of organising international sport as a means of promoting peace and unity after generations of conflict. The French are integral to international sport. Without the French and French individuals like Gilles Rimet in football, for example, we don't have FIFA, we don't have UEFA, we don't have what is now World Rugby, we don't have the IOC. Though I think World Rugby would have come about, the IOB, with British Empire, with the game being a British game, but we don't get those things. We don't get the 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 drive of international sport if it's not for France. Oh, when I think Juventus will be back, well, when they give up on the European Super League. Same with Real Madrid and Barcelona. They've got themselves in this mess. Is what it is. French Rugby League, yeah. I mean, yeah. It's growing rapidly. Um, it would be nice to see a standalone professional French league, but rugby union's got the money. That's where the money is in French sport, is with the rugby union. The top two tiers in French rugby union's got a lot more money than anywhere else, and rugby league's got to compete against that. The French league is so well funded that the French rugby league has to compete, but they love it down in the south and southwest of France. So Haaland's better. Mbappe, look at his time at the Euros. He was hopeless, so arrogant, big ego, and he plays in a weaker league, a less competitive league. Just putting it out there. And Bayern Munich losing 5-0 to Borussia Mönchengladbach in the week reminds me of my video of Borussia Mönchengladbach, the history video of Borussia Mönchengladbach I did a couple of years ago. They were more Bayern Munich in the 70s, but don't let modern fans forget that there is history to sport. Yeah, Juventus. I mean, like, they've had their period of dominance. It's come to an end. Like Inter before them, it's come to an end. The right managerial appointment can save Newcastle. I honestly think a relegation might be good for them. Take a year down the Championship, rebuild the club infrastructure, because I can see them panic buying and panic selling in January. They need a proper a decent managerial appointment to stabilise the situation and quickly, and they need their form to turn around very quickly, otherwise they're in trouble. Catalan's a joint venture club. They merged two clubs together to form Catalan to get the license to join Super League. Toulouse is the more historical club, yes, with the more historical fan base. But either way, I love French rugby because it's just flair. I love watching French rugby. It's really entertaining. They just throw the ball around like it's a hot potato. Yeah, well, the French have given it a better go when it comes to the World Cup. They've got to finals and fallen short, but that's possibly to do with their style of play. Unfortunately, French rugby is like the English Premier League. There's too much money floating around in rugby union, and it has damaged the game somewhat. But if the French play their power flair style, they can be the best team in the world. It's consistency with the French. It's what team turns up. They have not had selection consistency for so long. Since the 2007 World Cup, which was a brilliant tournament. I loved that tournament. Argentina came of age in that tournament. South Africa, did their thing. That was, for me, my favourite World Cup, rugby union wise. The French then had problems. They had gone away from their strengths, and since then, I think about nearly 250 players or something, or 180. The amount of players that have been capped by France since 2007 is ridiculous. There's been no selection consistency until recently, like with the young Entomac coming into the side, and some other young players who've now nailed down spots and got 20, 30 caps behind them. For so long, no consistency in selection. That's what I think what holds them back. I don't think the French will ever win. Wales win. No, I don't think Wales will win. Look at that performance yesterday. I didn't watch the game. Look at that scoreline. Embarrassing. At home. No, sorry. Can't do. The French can beat the All Blacks. The Welsh can't. Sorry. You've got to be able to beat the Springboks, the All Blacks, the Australians, and the Argentinians regularly. The Welsh can't do that. They just can't. I hope Hamilton doesn't. I hope we have a new champion and a new name on that title. I I've gone off F1 completely. Well, Lewis Hamilton. My dog's a vegan. Actually, now there's been legislation introduced that actually makes that illegal. So that's called animal welfare. Just putting it out there. Lewis Hamilton's one of those, like Anthony Joshua. He's one of those champagne socialists I can't stand. But if you say you don't like Lewis Hamilton, or apparently you're a racist, no, I just can't stand him because he's a champagne socialist twat. Nothing to do with the colour of his skin. I think he's a wanker. Very good at what he does. Absolutely, he's a brilliant driver. But notice when he was at McLaren and the car wasn't good, he wasn't as good. So there you go. It's all about the machinery you have in that class of motorsport. Sorry, F1 it's all about the machinery. Occasionally, you might get a good driver. I was not England and rugby were predicted before, but the World Cup was made to the final. The players were coaching themselves. Ashton, the coach at the time, was the wrong guy. Unfortunately, English rugby union is still living on that glory days of 2003. They've had some really poor appointments as coaches. They've had a poor team culture for a long time. I'm not a fan of the English national side. Women's game, I am. I think the women's game, alongside the women's All Black side, I like. I'm going to look forward to watching that in 15 minutes. I really am. When it comes to English Rugby Union, wealthiest union out there, most player depth out there. We've got a foreign coach in charge. Well, it's become the global game now, hasn't it? But I'm not sold on a lot of things that the RFU have done. Rob Andrews and Knob, met him as well. Oh, he's a great player, he was a solid player, not a great administrator. There are issues within the domestic game. I think the only two leagues that don't have money problems is the French game and the North American Major League Rugby. All the rest of the domestic leagues are in massive financial stress. Professionalism hasn't worked. I don't know. I don't think Australia win it next. Again, they're relying on their glory days of 20 odd years ago as well. Their domestic game, while they've had a good solid year, the Sheffield Shield, the domestic game in Australia isn't great. The crowd numbers are poor. The quality of the player development isn't there. You need a strong foundation base. It's not looking good. I think Australia just had a purple patch, change in coaching, a change in key members of the squad. Great. I think they're peaking too soon. The World Cup's 2 years away. They're still 2 years. Again, the Australian Rugby Union national side are relying on the glory days of 20 years ago when the domestic game was strong, the TV deal was good, crowd numbers were good, and you watch the Sheffield Shield and you'll cry your eyes out at how bad it is. Major League Rugby's got money, and the French game's got money, and that's a problem when you're losing talent who is registered to play for Australia, who goes, I'm going to play in France because I'm going to get a decent salary, or I'm going to play in North America because I'm going to get a decent salary and get to play and develop my skills. I can't afford to keep playing in Australia. The money isn't good enough. Again, it's money. It's TV deal, it's exposure, it's money. And I'm gonna use this example that I always use. Two players I'm gonna name for you. One is just retired a couple of years ago. He's now doing some coaching and some media work, and another one is a club captain. Okay, Clint Gutherson, who can play in the centres, on the wing, or at fullback. Guess what? Youth rugby league, played rugby union at youth level. Cooper Cronk. Just gonna put that out there. They were lost. What's his name? He plays for the Sydney Roosters. He used to play for the Rabbitohs. He's a forward. I've forgotten his name. Angus Crichton, another one. Ex-Union player at youth level. So I'm naming like players who played state of origin, play for their country, and they've been lost to rugby union. You know why? Because money. Because they were talented and they were given the opportunity to play both codes, and then rugby league were like, "We'll get you in our youth setup now," You can play through the youth grades. We'll get you on a basic contract. We'll develop you. Israel Folau, yeah. Well, he actually started off in league, went to AFL, then went to Union, then went back to league. So Israel Folau, he did play for Union, but he was one of those mercenary players. Danny Cipriani, his off-field antics did him in, but I don't think he's the biggest underachiever. He got to the national side. You can say, look, I've got an international cap. I'm the best player in my position at that time. The fact he had about, I think, 16 caps in total. I think 12, 16 caps in total, and he should have gone to the last World Cup. His off-field antics did him in. That was his problem. Was his off-field problems. Tuivasa-Sheck, yeah, he played Union first, then came to league and has gone back to Union. But his best days are behind him. So the All Blacks are getting a player who's past his best. But the Australian, I'm going to finish on this. I'm going to finish on this because I'm obviously going to go watch the women's rugby now. I'm going to say this. Rugby Australia, their problem, instead of developing the youth with the money they spend the money that they could develop with youth and support the Super Rugby franchises and the Sheffield Shield clubs. They spend big money to get mercenary rugby league players to convert to play for them, like Wendell Sailor. And Wendell Sailor, brilliant, right? Brilliant. Well, New Zealand, it's you play both codes. It doesn't matter if you're playing league or union. You play both codes, and then you get given a choice. And obviously, there's more professional union club sides, but you're still going to have a go at league as well because you know either way there is more support, more money there, and more structures in place, and they just produce talent like a factory. It's just coming off a production line. It's the same as Africa. It comes off a production line. They're playing New Zealand in 8 minutes, so I'm gonna leave that there. But Rugby Australia, their floor, they're paying massive contracts to league players to entice them over on centralised contracts, and then they don't pan out when they could have spent that money on youth development. There you go. There's Rugby Australia's problem is the win now mentality. They're desperate. Sebastian Chabal, I will leave Sebastian on Sebastian Chabal. Legend. There's my thoughts. Sebastian Chabal, legend, absolute legend of the game. They tried. It'll be difficult. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm gonna obviously go watch the rugby, and I will see you all again very, very, very soon.